Hello everyone. This should be a fairly quick lesson. I just want to cover another big tool that can help us reduce duplicate code in our project. So let's learn about a function named getTemplatePart. Alright, now let's begin by giving ourselves a goal. When it comes to duplicate code, you might have noticed that we are displaying events like this in 4 different places throughout our website, right? So here on the home page is 1. And then if we go to the All Events archive, that's 2. And then if we go to the Past Events page, that's 3. And then if we go to a Program page and check out the related upcoming events, that's 4. So that means we've duplicated this exact same event block code 4 times. And we can do better than that. We can write cleaner code than that. So our goal for this lesson is to move or consolidate this code into its own individual file, and then we can just call and recycle that file wherever we need to. So right now let's jump into our text editor, and why don't we start with our home page. So let's jump into frontpage.php. If we scroll down a bit, here's the custom query that pulls in the 2 most rapidly approaching events. And down a bit further, here's the while loop. And this div with a class of event summary, this is the duplicate code that I'm referring to, right? This is what controls how each event gets displayed on the front end. So from this opening div tag down to this closing div, this is identical in all of those 4 locations that we just looked at on our website. So why don't we do this? Let's go ahead and highlight and select this div, and let's copy it into our clipboard, or actually, why don't we cut it into our clipboard? And then in its place, let's just add a temporary X as a placeholder. We will circle back to this in just a moment. But for right now, I want to go and create a brand new file for that code. Now we could go ahead and create the new file in the root of our theme folder, but to stay organized, why don't we create a new subfolder? So in our theme folder, new folder, and we could name the folder whatever we want. Doesn't matter, but just to make sense, I'm going to name it Template Parts. Okay, so in the theme folder, I've got this new subfolder, Template Parts. Let's create a new file in that folder. And in the new file, go ahead and paste in your clipboard. Okay, let's go ahead and save. We could name the file whatever we want, but why don't we call it event.php. Okay, and now if we jump back to our front page file, the question becomes, how do we import in the contents of that new file where it used to live right here? Well, let me show you. So this used to be HTML, right? That's why we were dropping out of PHP here and then entering back into PHP here. But now that we're just going to import in that other file, we don't need HTML at all. So we can delete this placeholder X, and then we can also get rid of this closing PHP tag, and get rid of this opening PHP tag here. Okay, and then right below this line, let's drop down. This is where our HTML used to live. And instead, let's just call a function named getTemplatePart. And this function takes 2 arguments, although the second one is optional. For the first argument that is required, we basically just point towards that new event file that we just created. So quotes, and then we want to point within the new folder that we created. So the folder name was Template Parts / to look inside the folder, and then we named the file event. Now I want to point out that you do not say event.php. You don't need the full file name, you just need the slug name of the file. Okay, let's go ahead and save this, and if we jump back to our home page on the website, cool, we see that our events look exactly the same. Now before we move on and update the other 3 duplicate locations, I first want to let you know about the second argument that we can pass along to the getTemplatePart function. So we learned that the first argument points towards the file that you want to include, but we can also pass this function a second argument, so comma, and then I can include any word here that I want. So I could say pizza or unicorn, but for an example, if I say excerpt, so with this in place, now this function is going to try to include in a file that lives in the template parts folder that is named event and then dash excerpt. So WordPress adds a dash at the end of this base slug name, and then it just depends on this specialty name. So just as a quick example, with this code in place, let's rename our event file that we created just a moment ago. So in our template parts folder, let me rename event.php, and let me rename it to event-excerpt. So if we go ahead and save this, see that nothing changes on the front end. Now at first glance, this specialty name might seem pointless, and you definitely don't need to include a second argument like this. However, it does allow for some pretty cool setups. So check this out. What if instead of the base name being event, what if we say the base name is content, and then for the second argument, the specialty name, what if instead of a string of text, what if we pass along get post type? Right? And this function will return event or professor or post or page. So the idea is if we use a function for the argument, now the file name that this is going to search for is dynamic. Right? In this context, this will try to pull in a file named content-event. And that can be a nice way to set things up, for example, on an all search results screen, because then in your template parts folder, you could create different files named content-event, content-post, content-professor, right, for all of your different post types. And each file can use its own unique PHP and formatting and styling, and WordPress will know which file to use depending on the post type. So that's a bit of a tangent. You don't need to use the second argument here. I just wanted you to be aware of it because you can get fairly creative with it. In this particular instance on the home page, we know that we are always going to be working with event post type right here. So there's no need to call a function. We could just say event. But maybe later on when we work with global search results, that dynamic way of doing things will be a great benefit to us. Anyways, long story short, this is going to look for a file named content-event. So why don't we rename our template part file to match? So within template parts, let's rename our file to content-event. Okay, and if we refresh our home page, cool, there's our events. At this point, let's just work through the 3 other duplicate locations. So if we go to the View All Events Archive screen, let's update this to use our new template part file. So this screen is powered by archive event. So in that file, we can just scroll down to where we see the div with a class of event summary. Let's go ahead and delete that entire div. And then again, since we don't need to be in HTML, we can get rid of the closing PHP tag here and this opening PHP tag. And let's just call get template part. For the argument, let's look inside that new folder, template parts. And since we're not using a function to dynamically decide which file to look for, we can just type the entire file slug right here. We can say content-event. Let's save that. Cool, we're still in business and we just removed a bunch of duplicate code. Next, let's move on to the Past Events Archive screen down here. So this screen and URL is being powered by page-past events. So let's jump into that file, page past events. Let's scroll down a little bit. Here's the div with a class of event summary. All that duplicate code, let's just delete that. Get rid of the extra PHP tags that we don't need. And then let's call get template part and go inside our folder and grab that file. Perfect, still looks good. And finally, let's go to a program detail screen like biology. And down here we see upcoming events. So let's remove this duplicate code. This screen is powered by single-program. You know the drill. Let's scroll down until we find that event summary div. Here it is. So let's just go ahead and delete all of this duplicate code. Get rid of the PHP tags. Call get template part. Go inside our folder and grab the file. Perfect. Now before we bring this lesson to a close, I want to address a question that you might have. You might be thinking, hey, in our last lesson we learned how to create recyclable functions to reduce duplicate code, and now in this lesson we just learned about get template part. So how am I supposed to know which route to choose? I know that most of the time duplicate code is bad, but how do I know which tool is right for the job to remove the duplicate code? Well, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to that question, but I can tell you how I make my choices. So if I want the duplicate code in question to be flexible, right? If I want to be able to pass it arguments to make it do different things, like we did for our page banner, then that's when I create a recyclable function that lives in functions.php. On the other hand, if I have a bunch of duplicate code that doesn't need any custom arguments or parameters, and it's literally just a blob of HTML and PHP that's always going to be the same, those are the times when I reach for get template part. That's just how I do it personally. You're free to use whichever option you feel is right. What's important though is that either way, we are getting rid of duplicate code. All right, that's it for this task. In our next lesson, we will create the campus's post type. It should be a lot of fun because we are going to create an interactive Google map with pins to all of our campus locations. Let's keep things rolling, and I will see you then.